Let's talk about the upcoming UFC 298 match between Garry and Geoff Neal. I'm really surprised that I haven't seen more buzz about this fight yet because I do believe it could steal the show, and it could steal the press conference, especially if Garry keeps up the same sort of antics that he used the last time. But whether the drama comes back or not doesn't really matter. This fight is very interesting on several different levels. On the one hand, you have this young and up-and-coming guy that everybody thinks is going to be the future of the division. And on the other, you have a tough, dangerous, boogeyman sort of a character in Geoff Neal that I do not believe is getting the respect that he deserves. Make no mistake about it, folks, this is by far Garry's most difficult fight to date, and I am going to break down all of that for you in this video. But before I do, let me say this. Much of the context that I'm going to be using in this video is derived from the last video I did specifically about Garry. If you haven't seen that yet, I highly suggest you check it out because I do a real deep dive into his actual performances to see whether or not he lives up to the hype, in my opinion. I don't just give you conjecture and the idea that he's going to be some future great thing because I think so. I will leave a link to that video down in the description, and also there will be a card at the end of this video that you can just click. So with that said, I decided that if I was going to be doing these types of breakdown videos, that I wanted to sort of follow a format that I could replicate in the future. That process will be giving you a fight overview, then the strengths and weaknesses for each fighter, the keys to victory for each fighter, and then what I believe to be the most probable outcomes and my overall predictions for the fight. So with that said, let's get into it. This is a very interesting matchup for several reasons. Garry has already reached a sort of star status. However, this match will give him a chance to really solidify whether or not he has the potential to become a division champion. Like I said, Geoff Neal is the absolute most difficult fight that Garry has ever had. And from Geoff Neal's perspective, this is truly his opportunity to break through. If he manages to beat Garry, he can go ahead and steal some of his star status for himself. In addition to that, if Geoff Neal beats Garry, he will be catapulted into the title discussion. He will obviously have to wait in line because he did lose to Shavkat, who is going to be ahead of him in that discussion. However, I think it is fair to say he gave Shavkat his most difficult fight ever. If Garry thinks that he's going to walk through Geoff Neal the same way that he walked through Neil Magny or walked through Daniel Rodriguez, he has got a rude awakening coming his way. Geoff Neal is tougher than both of those fighters, and Geoff Neal is more dangerous virtually everywhere than either of those fighters. So with those points in mind, let's go through the strengths and weaknesses of each one. Starting with Garry's strengths, I will summarize a few of the points that I identified in my dedicated video. First, Garry is very tall for the division, and that can often lend him a reach advantage, especially when it comes to using his legs. Garry is also very fast. He moves in and out very well. He has a tremendous low kick that he's used in almost every one of his fights, and he basically crippled Neil Magny immediately with it in their recent fight. He's also very confident. And I would say he's very resilient because when he gets hurt, he does a pretty good job of bouncing back quickly. If we look at Garry's weaknesses, though, there are many. And I don't think a lot of people are picking up on this. If you want to see this in more detail, like I said, go check out that video. But to start with, Garry is very hittable. If you go back and watch fights where he fought fighters that put pressure on him, he got hit on a regular basis and sometimes very hard. But fortunately for him, not by people who hit hard enough to actually knock him out. Also, he has shown me absolutely nothing when it comes to the grappling department. He doesn't look strong, he doesn't look dominant, he doesn't look like he can hold positions, and anytime I've ever seen him in the grappling department with a dominant position, he loses it almost instantly. Now, when it comes to Geoff Neal, he has many strengths, and I think he's somewhat of a boogeyman or a sleeper in the division. I think the biggest problem that he's had is he's had a lot of inconsistent performances, and there are times when he just doesn't look good, like when he fought Neil Magny. But the Geoff Neal I'm speaking about in this video is the post-pandemic Geoff Neal, the one who fought Shavkat and the one who fought Vicente Luque. And the primary strengths that I think he has are toughness. His boxing is very crisp and very tight, and he's generally pretty strong in the clinch. He does have a lot of power potential in his shots, but he does tend to stick a bit more with technical boxing. But I do think he's more dangerous on the feet than anybody Garry has fought before. So now that I've covered Neal's strengths, let's go ahead and cover his weaknesses. He seems, unfortunately, to be one of those guys where you don't know who is going to show up. Is it going to be the Geoff Neal who's in shape and can go all 3 rounds? Or is it going to be the Geoff Neal who misses weight or doesn't have the cardio to go all 3 rounds? Also, he has struggled to win against fighters who are able to fight at a distance, like Stephen Thompson, or taller, lankier fighters like Neil Magny, even though that was just a slow performance and a boring decision. So the real primary weakness when it comes to him is whether or not he's going to be committed, whether or not he's going to be on weight, and whether or not he's going to be in shape. So now that we've covered the strengths and weaknesses, let's go through the keys to victory for each fighter. Starting with Ian Garry, I think his key to victory is to plan on winning a decision by points. I don't think he has the power to put somebody like Geoff Neal away without significantly exposing himself to power shots that could put him away. Ian Garry should rely on the length of his legs to throw a bunch of kicks and to keep Geoff Neal at a distance. Even though Geoff Neal is significantly shorter than Ian Garry is, he has a longer reach. So Ian Garry's going to have to be careful about his approach to popping in and out with jabs. If Garry can maintain his distance and bust up Neal's legs, possibly even catch him in the head with a powerful leg kick, I think he has an opportunity to cruise to a comfortable decision. Geoff Neal has only been finished one time, and that was by Shavkat Rakhmonov late in the third round, and Shavkat is the king finisher. Most of Ian Garry's fights have gone to decision, so I really don't think it's realistic for him to expect to finish Geoff Neal. He's just too tough. Now, when it comes to Geoff Neal's keys to victory, there are some very specific things he needs to do. First and foremost, like I said earlier, he needs to come in shape, and he needs to be ready to go all 3 rounds while having a high output. I think he has the toughness to absorb most of Ian Garry's potential shots, so his plan should be to try to get in close and make it a dogfight. Ian Garry is very hittable, as I demonstrated in my last video about him, and Geoff Neal has the kind of power that could take him out. So when I think about strategy for Geoff Neal, it's to put Garry away and not try to go to a decision. I've seen nothing in the grappling department from Garry that would concern me for Geoff Neal, so he should try as much as possible to be on the inside and landing power punches. If he's able to do that for the majority of the 3 rounds, I think the chances of him getting a knockout are incredibly high. Garry was almost knocked out by Jordan Williams in his debut fight, and had that shot been landed by somebody with more power like Geoff Neal, it very well could have been over. But the bottom line is, if Neal wants to win this fight, he's probably going to have to get it done before a decision. Now that we've covered the keys to victory, I want to run through what I think are the most probable outcomes and predictions for this fight. If I knew that Geoff Neal was coming in the best shape he's been in the last couple years, and if he's fired up, I would have my money on him all day. But because I just don't know, I'm not nearly as confident that he won't be able to stop Garry from squeaking out a decision. Now, career momentum has definitely been with Ian Garry, although at one time it was also with Darren Till, and we saw how that turned out. Overall, it's really hard for me to decide who's going to win this fight, even though I truly believe it's Geoff Neal's fight to lose. I think he has more ways to win because I do think he could take a decision, and also I think he's the only one of the two with high potential for a knockout. And because I think this is almost a pick'em in terms of who will actually get the victory, I'm looking at it more from a standpoint of what would be the strategic bets to place. I do think the chances of a submission happening in this fight are incredibly low, so I'm not even going to look at that. So it comes down to who's more likely to win if it goes to a decision, and who's more likely to win if there is a knockout. If I had to throw percentages at those, I would say Garry is probably more likely to win a decision by perhaps 60% to Geoff Neal's 40%. However, if we look at a knockout, I think that's much more in Geoff Neal's favor, probably to the tune of 80% for him and 20% only for Ian Garry. So with all of that said, the bets that I'm most interested on this card are Ian Garry by decision if the odds are good. I'm going to wait until a little bit closer to the event to see. And then I'm going to also look at Geoff Neal by finish and Geoff Neal straight up because he's almost 2-1 right now, which I think is pretty decent given his probability that he could win this fight. So that's going to be it for this video. If you like this and enjoy this, please give the video a like. That really does help out. Also subscribe because I am working hard to put stuff out and I would love to have you back in the future. Lastly, be sure to leave your comments down below. I would love to see, do you think I'm crazy for even imagining that Geoff Neal has a shot in this fight? Who do you think is going to win and by what method? I'll look forward to checking all of that out and I hope all of you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for being here.